Yo, what's going on? So good to see you. So today we're dealing with a little bit of a dilemma. Essentially, we've made a track on our groove box. In this case, it happens to be the Digitac. Sounded sick from the left and right master outs, but once I record everything into Ableton Live as separated stems, the drums and the vibe just kind of falls apart, right? So I'm going to show you how I took my track from this to this. Surprisingly, this is a pretty-ish simple sort of fix, and I want to run you through it. Basically, we're going to be talking about corrective compression, creative compression, a bit of saturation, and just kind of gluing it all together when it comes to all the samples. This track I made, of course, on the Digitac. Yes, I work at Electron. That's my day job. This ain't sponsored by nobody. And using Overbridge. And the reason this looks like one giant recorded stem is because this was a performance. I just hit record and went to town, and that's why the OCTATRACK also has like the main parts, the little lead line, the bass line, the sampling. It's just the left and right out of the OCTATRACK, and we'll talk about how to make this sound better as well. So let's get into it. First and foremost, we're going to go ahead and highlight all our drums and then hit Command G and put them into their own group. This is kind of like a drum bus in a way, not really, because you don't really have too much of the dry wet mix, but we're forcing all the drum sounds into a group together so we can affect them all the same. Now that we're here, I'm going to hit Command F and type in COMP, press down and hit enter. That's going to bring up our compressor and just put it into the selected track. Command F is a shortcut for find within Ableton Live. Really, really handy to know. I use that more than dragging and dropping all this stuff. And it's great because we're also going to add a saturator to this, and we might as well do that now. Command F, SAT, boom, there's your test scores. Turn that off for now. Let's just focus in on the compressor. So if we wanted, we could look at the compressor here on the Digitac, right? A ratio for a pretty low threshold, fast attack, somewhat fast release, a lot of makeup gain, and then it's just listening to the main left and right output as its source in terms of what it's going to be compressing, and in this case was kind of everything. So let's go ahead and try to recreate that to kind of get us in the ballpark. And of course, every compressor is going to act a little differently, and of course your attacks and ratios are going to be a little different depending on what piece of hardware or software you might be on, but it's good enough. Our ratio is already at 4. We'll give ourselves a little bit of a faster attack and a slightly longer release, and if we press play, I'm going to grab our threshold and bring it down until it starts getting kissed by our gray signal down here, which is the overall incoming drum signals. Now you can hear, like, if we go all the way down, it's slamming. Our kick is clearly the loudest thing here, which is something I've done on purpose so that the compressor, again, works in this almost sidechain way without being a sidechain compressor. Now that we're about here, let's jump over, hit tab, and look at our meters. If I take our compressor off, we're in about the -12 to -10 range with the compressor on. You know, we're still kind of there, but you can see that it's kind of hovering at -12, and once in a while it jumps up. I think we might be dealing with something in the digital clipping or digital transient headroom readout thing. I've talked about it a bunch of times in my How I Mix Tracks in 20 Minutes video. And what's actually really funny is this mix is straight off the Digitac. None of the levels are changed. And you can actually see that these almost move in this -12 to -6 dB cascade to kind of get a decent mix. So I kind of nailed it just on the Digitac using its levels. But before I get too ahead of myself, what I wanted to address is that if I go to our clap, I have a feeling, most of the time it's usually the clap that does this. I'm going to throw a soft limit on here. I have a feeling that the clap might be faking out our compressor and faking out my eyes, which is what I should not be using to mix when looking at these levels. So I'm going to bring this down a little. Still starts getting a little hit. There it is. And this is just kind of shaping the transient to take out that initial peak. But you need to be careful because if I turn this off, you can see it's gotten a lot louder. We're right here. And bring it up. It's boosting it. And this is our auto makeup, right? So depending on how much it's limiting and reducing in gain, it's going to auto make up that, and you got to be careful because it's going to add gain when you might not want that. You might just want to shape the transient. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. Cool. I'm happy with that. Easy peasy. Cool. Sounding pretty good. It's kind of gluing it together. If we listen to the original again, clearly missing a reverb on the clap. How did I not hear that the first time around? Awesome. And I'm going to use this again in this rhythmic, creative way. So I'm going to turn our pre-delay up to 170. It's kind of the sweet spot for most of my tracks, BPM wise. I'll tell you what this is in a second. Right? The clap happens, and then the pre-delay is how big of a delay until we start hearing that reverb signal. And this kind of starts adding right? You could play around with this, but I really like the way 170 sounds. It's always worked for me. And I'm going to cut out some of these low ends and maybe let the high ends ring a little more. We'll bring this down a little more. And now I'm going to just bring this way, way down, because without it, really dead. With it, right? And then with everything, kind of helps bring it together. And you might also notice, which I just did, I put this on the drum bus, but luckily we're just only listening to the clap for that moment, so I'm just going to drag it over onto the clap track. Makes no real difference other than just affecting the clap, which is what we wanted to do originally. That's cool. I'm happy with that. Okay, so compression wise, we kind of got it in a nice area, right? The kick is kind of shining through, and the compressor is kind of pushing some other sounds up and pushing some other sounds down and kind of gluing it all together. But I still think it's missing a bit of oomph. And this is where we're going to deviate from what the original sound was. Because a lot of times I use the effects in the Digitac to kind of get me into just a vibe in a ballpark range. But I really want to push the envelope, no pun intended, within live to kind of get a new sound out of this. So listening to this group, we have the Saturator, and this is one of my favorite tools to use. It's a little funky at times, but my favorite way of doing it is setting our output to -10, because the Saturator is always just going to start increasing the volume and clipping. Analog clip is fine, soft sine is also kind of cool, but we'll leave it on analog clip for now. And now, if I turn off our Saturator and I take a note of where we're at gain-wise, kind of between -12 and -6, we turn this on, I can just start turning up our drive. And look, if I turn this way up, you can see it's just hard stop, hard limit right here. The overdrive and the distortion circuits are being maxed out or hitting their limits, and clipping, that's what saturation kind of does. And this, we can use this to our advantage. Right? Because if I were to put both of these into a group now, turn this off, let's see. Our group is right here, -12 to -6. And then we turn this on. Boom. It's so much bigger. It sounds way better. And there might be something else that we're missing. This was a super rough mix from the Digitac, but we can clean this up a bit because I know my kick, I probably didn't add much on it. Let's see. Yeah, look, our kick on the secondary filter, it's just fully wide open. There's no cutting of the frequencies. And a lot of times when it comes to samples, whether it's kicks or percussions or claps or whatever, hi-hats, there will be a lot of low end that you might not need. And in this case, I know that our bass line, which if I solo this, that bass is really deep, right? And I want that to shine through. I want that to be the main component of our bass. So what I'm gonna do is select the high pass filter for the kick drum and just set it to 50. And already that sounds cleaner to me. Watch without this. With it. This is just a punch to the chest. That feels really good. I mean, not that a punch to the chest does, but this just sounds like this big, dirty undergarment. Like it's just heavy. Not in a good way. This sounds lean, crisp, intentional, really focused. And what's funny is there's nothing on the master besides a limiter, and it's not even being hit. So this is just goes to show you the power of mixing. And actually, while I'm here, this weird broken break sound here, I think might have some low end in it that I don't need. Let's see. Yeah, look at that. That hi-hat, look at all this. That ain't a hi-hat, that's a kick drum. So same thing, we're gonna go high pass. I'm gonna set it to this like 4-pole mode. Bring it up a little bit. Just to give us some of that headroom, because in the moment, when we have these tracks soloed, it might not sound like a lot, but when you stack a ton of these sounds on with all that mud down below, it really starts to add up and rob headroom from your overall mix. And if I go and look at all these tracks, you can see I kind of did a rough mix here. So track 6 is the one with that weird break, and I didn't bring it up as much as I thought I needed to. I didn't hear it, but it's still there. So now that we have that cleaned up, we can go back to the matter at hand, which is listening to this little mix here. And again, before and after. Bigger, fuller block of sound, right? Not so much just these individual sounds popping in and out. So, okay, we got the corrective compression set up for our drums. Now, let's do something with this OCTATRACK track, because if I go and solo this right here, there's a lot of elements. Again, we're gonna start off with a little EQ8, and this is gonna allow us to emphasize sounds that we want to bring out. But we need to be careful because again, this was a performance. So there's parts of this, like if I go there, right? The filter's opening up on our sample, and maybe I wanna emphasize that a bit. Right, I can bring this up as high as I want, do whatever I want, doesn't matter. And I already know I'm waiting for the mixers and the mastering engineers to be like, what are you doing? You're doing it all wrong. But who cares? No one's walked off the dance floor just yet. We're still fine. It sounds pretty good. But there are a couple things that we do need to be wary of. And if you're wondering how I'm doing this so fast, check this out. While you have this selected and you're holding it down and moving it around, if you hold down Option, you'll actually start changing the cue point. And then if you let go of Option, you can then change just the frequency point as well as its gain in one movement. So that's another fun little tip. But let's play this back. And let's say just from this little part where the filter is open, I want to emphasize it a little. We'll open this up, a little bit of a bell. And you know what? This is kind of like a shelf. So we'll just switch this number 3 over to a shelf and then bring it back. Hold down Option to increase the resonance of that, so it's a little more focused. But then we got to be careful because if we go over here, that shaker's now here, and that shaker might be a little too much. So I'm going to go ahead and change 4 to a bell, find the shaker, and then bring it down. Sharpen it up. Watch, without 4. With it, just kind of contain it a little bit. It's not a lot, right? Something very simple, kind of subtle. This might even be a little too much. We'll bring that down like that. Now, I'm going to use a glue compressor this time to kind of help glue this up because the bass is clearly the loudest thing in this little sampley grabbed section, right? It's popping up, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to just grab our threshold, bring it down till we touch it. Give it a little bit of action. That's too much. A little more. There it is. Maybe our attack a little faster. And again, let's look at our gain. Where are we at? We're in this kind of -12 to -6 range. Get this in there. Awesome. We can boost that up a little bit for sure. There it is. Without it. With it. And what this is doing is it's controlling the volume of the bass peaks, but not pushing everything else down. I mean, it is right when the bass is hitting. That's the point of a compressor, which I'll talk about a little bit in a second. But it's helping everything else kind of pop back up and breathe a little bit more, because if this was really harsh, now it sounds like the bass is quiet and the shaker's too loud. But if we set it to where we had it before, a lot more even. If we take it off, the bass kind of sits on top. Just a little kiss, right? Let's do -15. That last bass note's pushing it a little too hard. We'll just do -14. Awesome. With it. Okay, cool. Now on to the final stretch, my favorite part, the creative compression. We're going to look at our master track now, and I'm just going to add another basic compressor and of course put it before the limiter. Our limiter here, we're set to minus 0.3 decibels. I got that tip from Daddy Kev's Twitter or X years ago. Years and years and years ago. I've kept it since because it really just kind of grabs it just before it starts to clip digitally, right when it's hitting 0. Just a little tip, I guess, if you want to continue carry on that tradition. But here, let's listen to our track. We're here. We can do whatever we want with compression. Check this out. If we wanted to really slam this, we'll turn this up to 10, bring our threshold down. And again, we can do whatever we want. Look, I can bring this all the way down. Maybe this is the creativity that I wanted to have. Let's mess around with auto gain because it can get kind of scary. I'm going to turn on auto gain and then turn on -2 because auto gain goes a little crazy for me sometimes. But look, as I turn this down, it's going to start bringing the volume up. Clearly, this is a little too loud. Let's go -10 because that's way too loud. Look, these are like the default settings in the compressor of Ableton Live. There, that's way too harsh, but it could be the vibe you're going for. We can increase our attack to really capture the clap and the kick sound, or we can raise our release to kind of soften it and give it these waves of pumping, right? I don't want that though. I like that more erratic kind of jumping. But our attack, I hate like a slow attack because it's just like letting the harshness of the kick and the clap come through. But I want to kind of grab that. But then the problem here is there's this weird zone of the attack where the attack's not doing anything. You start speeding it up and it's almost never fast enough to grab the first real sharp clap, transient sound, tick of the clap. I don't know what else to call it, right? But watch. Start lowering this a little. And I'll start letting off the gas a little. And now again, we'll turn this off. Listen to that. How crazy is that with it? This is a vibe. This is what I heard originally. Without it. This is cool. It's decent. But the vibe and the style that I'm trying to go for is super slamming. And this is where it's at. It helps bring everything else through. Let's see where else we're at. Jump somewhere else in the track. Oh, you got those strings in there. Now, here's another quick tip. You need to test this before you go too far. Let's see what happens when the kick comes out, because the kick is what's really driving all these compressors. See, the clap kind of jumps up real loud, but I think we're doing okay volume-wise if we take a look at this here. And it's still getting compressed a bit, but let's see what happens when the kick comes back in right here. Let's listen. Yeah, I'm down with this. It is a little hot, right? It's coming in a little hot. Back it off a bit. Maybe lower our ratio a little bit. Without it, with it. Yo, okay, quick rundown. If you've made it this far, you probably kind of get an idea of what's going on. The most important thing about the compressor, there's a ton of different things you can mess with, right? You got your knees, you can witness your gain reduction of what's happening, you know, look ahead, all these different weird logarithmic, exponential envelopes and all this stuff. But we got to understand the basics. The threshold. When you bring down your threshold, you're saying to your compressor, at what point when sound passes this amount, this threshold, will the compressor start pushing sounds down and compressing them? Then, I'm speaking as if I'm a compressor. When I do start compressing sounds, what ratio do you want me to compress those sounds at? Is it a 10-to-1 ratio? Is it a 2-to-1, right? Compress the volume by half? 10th of the original volume, a 20th of the original volume, infinity, which is like just don't let anything pass this one point. And not only that, okay, now that I know how much volume I'm going to be compressing the sound by once it passes this threshold, how quickly will I be compressing that sound? That's where the attack comes in. And then how quickly, once sound falls beneath that threshold, will I release my compression and my pushing down of that sound? How quickly will I release that volume and let it come back up? So with that combination, just those four things of the compressor, you can really build, based off of your rhythmic elements in your track, an almost instrument-like vibe and feeling using a compressor to change the vibe of your song. Because when the kick hits, it's going to push everything down. And then when the kick is gone, everything's going to come back up, and it kind of does this boom, 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 right? It's like it has this really nice bounce. Without it, sounds are happening. This might be the vibe you want too, and that's okay. That's the beauty of this stuff. But what I want is when the kick is gone, all the sounds kind of come back up. When the kick is there, it pushes everything together. And when I say that, when the kick is hitting, all the other sounds that are playing at the same time as the kick being above this threshold part are going to be brought down with it. And then that's going to move over, and the kick is gone, and then these sounds are going to be able to come back up. But when the kick gets hit again, it's going to bring all those sounds down again. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense. Hopefully you learned something here today. Thanks so much for making it to the deep end. And until next week, my friend, you already know the drill. Share the love, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace. Now, I just need to add a guitar, which I bet you weren't expecting. I just need to add a single chord to this. You're more than welcome to stick around. But yeah, if not, until next time, my friend. Peace. Okay. Bring out this bad boy, the Jazz Master. Bet you didn't see that coming. I sure didn't, because I don't own this thing. Shout out Jake for letting me borrow this. Appreciate you, man. All right, it's just right here during the breakdown. I thought I heard a cool. Okay, cool, here we go. That's it, that's all I wanted. Maybe a little more in the back end, something cool. That was cheesy. That's it. That's a wrap, folks. Somebody get Warner on the line.